I would love to add a little bit more on that one.
Sure.
Traditionally, disposable mask is not good for the planet.
Hmm.
Um, just earlier last year, you can see that the number of masks to be produced, I mean, in the whole world was in the trillion.
Hmm.
And then um, disposable mask is not good in a way that obviously it end up in the ocean, just
Right.
similar to the plastic. So one of the thing that one of the issue that we're looking into when we are pivoting, when we were pivoting to the mask business was on that particular sustainability. So the way that we designing our mask is actually a three layer which is going really well with the current double masking
Right.
suggestion from the CDC.
This episode of the Smart Athlete Podcast is brought to you by Solpre. If you're active at all, whether you're running or simply out walking for the day, you've probably experienced one of the number one problems that active people have, and that's chafing. Solpre's all-new, all-natural anti-chafe balm solves that problem while feeding your skin the vital nutrients it needs to be healthy. If you'd like to stop chafing once and for all and treat your body right, go to solpri.com to check out the anti-chafe balm today. That's SOLPRI.com. Welcome to the Smart Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Funk. My guest today is a chemical engineer by training. He was working on his PhD, but during that process, found the opportunity to take on a commercial venture that really had a limited time to get into, to get going. So that also makes him the CEO of the tech startup Flextra Power. He's also an ultra runner, novice triathlete, but self-described as a lousy ultra athlete, which we're going to get into. Welcome to the show, Ling.
Thank you, Jesse. It's my pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. I've had a few CEOs come on to talk to me. I guess technically speaking, I'm a CEO, but since I'm basically a company of three, I don't think of myself that way. So I know you've got a lot going on, and I always appreciate spending a little time with me out of your day when there are, I'm sure, a dozen things on your plate to get done.
Thank you so much, Jesse. I think that don't underestimate yourself as a CEO of three. When I start my company, I am the CEO of one, and also I am the janitor of one. And then even now, when my company grow to 20 people, still the same. I
Mm-hmm.
am the CEO of the company, and then I am still the janitor of the company.
It's, I don't think people typically think of the CEO as, in that role necessarily, but it's good that, you see yourself as a steward, right? Of the captain of the ship, making sure everybody's taken care of and, making sure the ship is going in the right direction, right?
And not only that, I think I like the word janitor because as you initially introduced, I was a chemical engineer. I spent a lot of time in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually now looking into my team, looking into what they have done during the day when I am actually helping them cleaning up their experiment, looking at that, I put on my inspector hat and then literally I know exactly what has been going on during the day for that
Mm-hmm.
particular person. And that's exactly why I think that the janitor really a super important role, keeping the room clean, keeping put out the trash, all of those things. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, yeah, I love to be one of the first to be in. I might be busy, but then I would love to be the last to be out of the office, obviously before this thing, COVID, hit us, right?
Right. Right. It, that's, I hadn't thought about that, but that's kind of an interesting take where it's like you're going through cleaning stuff up and then that gives you the insight to what's been happening.
It's not just like an insight, it was just more like a curiosity because
Okay.
obviously my team is very opening. Whenever we have anything I am right there. They can just
Mm-hmm.
ask. But then at the same time, I have a feeling of me being alone and then just like cleaning things up for other
Mm-hmm.
people, and then really like seeing how people has done during the day. I mean, yeah, I don't have time to do that much more anymore. But then, yeah, I still remember that feeling when the team was growing from me alone to 3 people, and then we literally talk, I would say, almost 24/7. I
Mm-hmm.
remember, and then I love that feeling.
You know, I wonder when COVID started, or I guess I should say, started affecting the U.S. more significantly. I was having conversations on the podcast, and I recall thinking like, I don't want to talk about COVID too much because it's not going to last that long, and it'll blow over, and that's kind of the sentiment originally, right? There was concern, but a lot of people thought it won't be around much. But you and your company have played some role in trying to help us stay safe. So I'm wondering about how do you operate the company right now? Do you still have employees working in labs isolated? Like, how did you change your kind of internal setup to continue moving?
Sure. Let's take a step back and then let me do like a
Sure,
super quick introduction of me first.
absolutely.
So my name is Linh. I'm born and raised in Vietnam. Come to New York City, the best city in the world, in 2008. I got admitted to the PhD program in chemical engineering in Columbia University. And then, as you introduced before, I put my study aside because when I was working on my PhD, I was among the team as a co-inventor of the graphene nanomaterial technology back in the days, a decade ago. So in 2016, I found my company, Flectra Power, in order to further develop and commercialize the graphene technology in different applications, including health tech, including medical device, and also consumer application as well. So the first application we were trying to take on is how to integrate the nanomaterial into the insole.
Mm-hmm.
So the insole, turning the normal insole or the stupid insole into the smart insole, continuously tracking temperature, pressure, and other foot health condition. We specifically looking at diabetic patient.
Mm-hmm.
So in the past 4 years working on this product, we were able to help hundreds of diabetic patients, and then COVID hit us. I was able to survive. I mean, the company was able to survive by making a quick pivot into making the mask. And then that actually come about very, I would say, I was lucky at the right place at the right time. I have been in conversation with the hospital partner. And then at that time, remember exactly a year ago when COVID hit us, hospital was in the shortage of PPE or personal protection equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that time, we as a team, my team and then the hospital team, going back to the whiteboard, and then we were saying, how can we do from here, from company side, from the hospital side, there's a need. What can we do in order to help them? And then I still remember during my PhD, the nanomaterial that I was working on has an amazing property for antiviral.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was just like like a light bulb moment in my head. And then I was going back to the team, hop onto the whiteboard. At the time, we were already isolated, so virtual whiteboard, I would say. And then literally within 7 weeks, we were able to get the first prototype of the graphene mask
Mm-hmm.
out on the market. And those now going back to the how my company has been operating, we are operating 100% virtually right now. I am with my family now. The company is still operating in New York City, and then right now we have a COVID procedure in place. Only 1 to 2 people coming into the lab or
Mm-hmm.
coming into the office at one time. So definitely as an entrepreneur, as a team, the culture has shifted significantly. We used to talk with each other all the time, But now, how do we continue to innovate? How do we continue to really tackle on technical problem or technical issue? How are we doing that? We're still figuring out like literally how to do that. So it has been challenging not only for me, but then also for other startup company as well.
You talked about missing out on some of those conversations. I remember a guest, and it'll come to me in a minute which guest, but she was talking about, she was in an academic setting, but just missing out on being around all of her colleagues and having some of those kind of like incidental conversations that aren't planned, but then end up leading down, a path that you get to talking about something and that leads to some research that wouldn't have happened had you not just been like passing in the hall and saying hi. So it just makes me think about that. I don't really have a question. I think there's definitely value in being able to be present physically with each other, because otherwise we have to schedule these times and say, okay, we're getting on to talk, and then there's a time it stops, and it feels like spontaneity in some ways is like a spark for discovery.
That is totally right. And then in my world of academia, scientists and actually science, usually the most breakthrough science actually happen spontaneously. You cannot plan that.
Yeah. So we'll jump back to ask you about the mask. I've got a lot of questions from a logistical standpoint, both about it and production. The first thing that comes to mind, just as a person that produces physical products, is, so you're producing a prototype in 7 weeks. Is that correct?
It is correct.
So, given that, and please correct me, graphene is not a material that just any manufacturer can deal with. Were you talking with the manufacturer that was producing your insoles and having them pivot with you, or how did that did you onboard somebody else? How did that process go?
Sure. I think that question can be answered in a lot of different ways. And then I was lucky, again, to be in the right place at the right time, not only from the supply and demand perspective, but it's also from the partnership and manufacturing perspective.
Right.
I was really lucky. In 2018, my company has a chance to work with one of the largest material innovation in the world, WL Gore and Associates, the maker of Gore-Tex. Obviously, a lot of people have heard about Gore-Tex in other like a jacket, but then actually Gore-Tex is an amazing material science company. So working with Gore in the past, we were able to know a little bit about logistics. We were able to knowing a little bit about supply chain from production and then facility and all of those things. And then at the same time, I was able to connect with my family and then my network in Vietnam. At the time, you might remember that Vietnam was doing really well with COVID because we are super close to China. We have some information much early on from late 2019 to early 2020. So the government has made some, I would say, proper change to the border restriction and other thing, and then Vietnam was able to operate almost as normal business, almost as normal for the largely, for almost for the whole year of 2020. So again, we were able to make the mask along with the insole from the same list of manufacturing partner that we have been talking with, and then that was the first time that I have learned about import and export. That was the first time that I learned about how to airship versus shipping via sea. And it has been so much fun figuring that out. And again, as an entrepreneur, we know a little bit of everything. I think that is, again, triathlete, right?
Right.
A little bit of everything.
Right. And constantly adjusting, just like triathlon. You have a plan, you think you're going to do something something happens and then you got to adjust. And this is, you've probably experienced this where like the listener probably has no idea about this, but like air shipping rates from overseas, be it China or Vietnam, have been going up recently. And it's been very difficult on some supply chains, or then if they want to keep the price of their, goods down, then they have to ship by sea, which takes a much longer time, but is more economical. So it's been a challenge with our kind of global supply chain. I don't know how you guys have fared, but I know it's been a constant in kind of the entrepreneur circles that I run in. It's been a constant game of adjustment and trying to figure out, how do we tackle all of these issues and the stops and starts of everything with COVID going on, just
Yep.
trying to keep things moving.
Yep, totally. And then I'm in the startup and entrepreneur network. There's a lot of new activity or new initiative trying to see how we can better manage the supply chain. There's a lot of initiative on not only air travel, but also on sea travel, and then see how we can work on that.
Yeah. So I want to back up a little bit and actually talk about the mask. I unfortunately ran out of time to get to actually read the white paper you guys publish. But the gist I could tell is you're talking about the material being antiviral, but it's also hydrophobic. So, which to the layman is it doesn't like water. It repels water, so to speak. Is it largely that hydrophobic aspect that makes it antiviral, or does the graphene itself have an ability to kill or destroy viruses?
Actually, that is a combination of all of those property. So again, think Gore-Tex, right? Why Gore-Tex has been a super good rain propeller or like rain proof material. And then the way that we think about our mask and especially our graphene filter is that the ability to block um, uh, the viral containing droplet. Obviously, when someone's sneezing, they are sneezing out water droplet. And then within that water droplet, if the person is COVID positive, then there is a SARS-CoV coronavirus within that droplet. So what we are trying to see is that we were utilizing the hydrophobic or dislike water substrate. So by utilizing that, we actually showing in the lab that we can effectively block 80 to 90% of the water droplet. And then about 10 to 20% of the water droplet might still go into the to the substrate. And then that's where the graphene come to play. The graphene role actually in that particular sense was that is a nanomaterial, is super sharp.
Right.
And then from the molecular level, you can consider it as a, I would say like a sharp edge, like a razor, for example, that cut open the coronavirus. So we have seen that in the lab. There's a lot of publication. The first one came out from University of Hong Kong back in June of 2020. And then since then, there's a lot of work from graphene producer in the world. We were just tagging along, and then a lot of masks need to be made in order to protecting the whole world from this pandemic.
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder about, there was I saw a lot of pivots into masks. There's a entrepreneur I follow, and they predominantly produce like cloth type products. And then they ended up making masks out of like, when they're in the wedding business, and weddings basically dropped off the map, and they like pivoted to make masks. There's all these materials being used for masks, and rightly or wrongly, skepticism about what's effective, what's not effective, what should we be doing. It seems like you were in a very unique position to pivot and make a very useful item compared to, say, just making something out of regular cloth?
I would love to add a little bit more on that one.
Sure.
Traditionally, disposable mask is not good for the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Just earlier last year, you can see that the number of masks to be produced, in the whole world was in the trillion.
Mm-hmm.
And then um, disposable mask is not good in a way that obviously it end up in the ocean, just
Right.
similar to the plastic. So one of the thing that one of the issue that we're looking into when we were pivoting to the mask business was on that particular sustainability. So the way that we designing our mask is actually a 3 layer, which is going really well with the current double masking
Right.
suggestion from the CDC. So we were developing the mask itself as a packaging material, and then we have the graphene filter that it was coming in between
Right.
the mask. So basically, the mask itself is a normal cloth mask, but then what really protect you is actually the graphene filter that is going in between. And also we have seen from our customer, a lot of people were asking, hey, can I buy additional filter? And then sure, we listen to our customer, and then we offering them, hey, you can buy a pack of 3, which is last you for a month or two. You can buy a pack of 6, or you can actually buy more for you, for your family. And then actually a lot of people were saying, why don't you come up with a subscription business? And we did
Mm-hmm.
that. So we just take on we just take on the customer credit card, and then
Mm-hmm.
every month or two, we send them a pack of 3, make things easier for them.
Yeah, and that's something I've run into as well. Since I sell, personal care products, I didn't do subscriptions for a very long time. Um, and then I keep having people ask me, why don't you do subscriptions? Why don't you do subscriptions? So I finally said, okay, I still offer single, like you can just go buy a single. I think this is the same with you. If I remember the website correctly, you can just go buy one, but then you also have the option to
Yes.
subscribe. So
Mm-hmm.
it's, I like that. This is a bit of a diatribe, I guess, but it bothers me a lot when companies pivot from being able to buy the product or subscribe to just pushing everybody towards subscriptions, because it's like not everybody wants to engage that way. Some people do. So I appreciate you leaving it as both options. That's just a personal thank you, I guess. um, but
we
so
operating As a company, we operating in a way that customer first. So the
right.
customer has the most option, and then we, as a company, try to do our best in order to accommodate that customer, from personal customer like a consumer buying our mask,
Yeah.
or actually from the business who are subscribing for our insole solution for helping diabetic patient.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how did the shift, how did that change, or did it change like the visibility of the company, since it's in some ways kind of the same big market, but obviously a very different product in the pivot? So are you getting more, I would assume with the insoles that you're probably working more with like business side customers versus the mask is going to be more consumer level, or the ability to have more consumer level. So, I mean, how did the shift change kind of your visibility, so to speak?
Sure. I think that the visibility you mentioned might be answering in the branding perspective,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be in the impact, or like in the influence perspective. I would firstly talk about the brand. So when we first started the company, the name was actually Bon Bhutan. So Bon Bhutan is a very good consumer facing name. But then during the pandemic, we will actually take on one of the items that we shelve, which is obviously rebranding. And then during the pandemic, the team got back together. We rebrand from Bombaton to Flecture Power, which is the power of the flexible and transparent material,
Mm-hmm.
graphene. it go really well with the vision of the company, really, because the graphene material can power both the insole and the mask. So that is going well from the branding side. What
Mm-hmm.
you talked a little bit about before was on the insole business. We work with insurance company, we work with hospital, mainly big and medium-sized businesses. So obviously the customer base, the client base, the user base are totally different. Um, but then at the same time, I think that again, the work that we are doing, it can bring impact if we seeing the mission of the company being the same in helping everyone from diabetic patient to normal people, uh, from pandemic. Um, that is good. We were just thinking like if we were able to somehow ramping up the production earlier, if we have a little bit more money to market this product
Mm-hmm.
to the US market, we might not have 500,000 people die from pandemic, which is crazy, which is a sad milestone for the
Yeah.
US.
Yeah. Um, I, I have so many questions about graphene and the products and stuff. I'm a little bit like I'm not sure where to jump to, but I do want to talk a little bit
You
more.
just need to start
Yeah, I know.
asking
I
question.
know. Why we always have we have a little time. I'm like, we're gonna run out of time. I'm gonna have so many questions left. Um, so I want to ask about the insoles because I've talked to several different people, both like startup founders and the first person that come to mind is Matt Jordan, who works at the Canadian Institute of Sport. He works with like Canadian Olympic athletes. I'm thinking about the insole. There's a lot of people working on like technology to track athletic performance, all these kind of things, and obviously you have receptors in this insole to track for I think it's ulcer development for diabetic patients' feet, which is an awesome product. I as a backstory, I worked in a shoe store that helped diabetic patients and other people with health conditions fit shoes to make sure that they didn't end up with problems down the line and end up potentially having amputations. Yours is obviously a much more technologically advanced and what I want to say probably accurate way to help prevent that. But because of where I come from, my immediately jump thinking about it is, are you gonna? Do you have any thoughts about spinning off like a subdivision to make like sport application for the insole? And has that ever crossed your mind? I guess.
Not only has it ever crossed my mind, I'm actually testing my product in one of my racing or actually
Yeah.
ultra running as well. And too bad in that particular running, I developed a blister on
Mm.
my toe. So obviously the product didn't work for me at the time. Anyway, that was just it was just a joke. But then it actually happened, even though it was a joke for me that I developed blister during my run. So when as you remember, and then as the audience might have remembered that when I was working on my PhD, we have a technology, and then we don't know what that technology will be applicable in. So when I was talking with a lot of people, I got the feedback was, "Hey, you are the solution looking for a problem." So at that time, I still remember during my time of incubating the idea back in 2015, 2016,
Mm-hmm.
I was having a list of all of the potential application
Mm-hmm.
for the technology that I was working on. We have, at the time, I have about 114, 115 potential application, and diabetic foot amputation or diabetic foot ulceration was not even in the top 50.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the reason that I came about this diabetic foot ulceration was actually stemmed from my wife pregnancy. She got gestational diabetes and then experiencing that amazing pregnancy with her. We share a lot. And then at the same time, I learned more about diabetic foot care. And then you said before about orthotic solution, how to fit the shoe. Um, I was thinking like Fletcher Power and orthotic solution, actually a complementary rather than competing with each other. Again, long story short, we were focusing on, I mean, as a company, we were focusing on developing the health tech, food care kind of solution for diabetic patient first. Would it be possible for us to work with athlete? I would love to sometime in the future when we show that, hey, this capability can be applicable. I would love to get it tested by an amazing athlete. I have been talking with Nike as well.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see that if there is a reality coming out of that project or like that conversation.
I definitely think, it's all theoretical, obviously, and you're the one that has the in-depth knowledge about the technology, but because especially runners, we're talking about runners in particular, because that's kind of where I live. But I would think that with enough data, especially kind of self-selected data, so like say I'm wearing them and there's enough data collected over, we'll say a month. I don't know how long it needs to be, but say a month is the threshold. And then 3 months down the line, the technology notices that now my strike pattern on the ground is different. Well, that is probably an indication that there's some kind of injury forming, like I'm running differently for some reason. It could be kind of a precursor to kind of like the ulceration technology saying, hey, like go check out a doctor. In this case, saying,
yep,
hey, like something's wrong. Maybe it's not able to say you pulled your hamstring or, you have a stress fracture, but that, hey, there's something off. Like you should maybe go through these steps or something. So that's the thing I think about, because otherwise we're always straddling the line. And I'm sure you've been through this since you, even though describe yourself as lousy at it, you're still doing triathlons and ultras. We're always straddling the line between how much is too much training and just enough. And
yep,
it's easy to go
totally.
over that line.
Yep,
So
it is a very fine line, and I totally agree with you, Jesse. I still remember the time I got a shin splint
mm-hmm.
that put me off running for a month. I felt terrible.
Yeah.
But actually, going back to your previous question, I think that there are a lot of work. There's a lot of new activity from startup as well as the large corporation right now. And
Mm-hmm.
then the way that I'm seeing it, actually, there are two big trends. Number one is actually on the professional athlete, how to help them increasing their performance.
Yeah.
And then on the other side with the mass market, how do technology, how do different kind of service help the mass markets reducing the injury. So those are the two big trends. And then yeah, I would love to see like how Fletcher Power uh, can play some kind of role in either a professional athlete or in the mass market
Mm-hmm.
later. We
Mm-hmm.
need to focus as an entrepreneur
Yeah,
for now.
right. That's the tough part, right? Is like I definitely have this tendency where you're like, okay, there's this possibility and there's that possibility and there's all these things we can do, but then we have to focus on like this. Just this is the one thing that we do and we're going to do it very, very well. So I definitely
Just
get
like
that.
as a runner, right? Just like
Yeah,
as a runner, just focus on your run.
yeah, yeah.
But at
So
the same time, enjoying whatever happening around you,
right, and then
especially trail running.
right, and like we said earlier, that like sometimes the best things that happen we didn't plan for. So sometimes things just happen and it sends you down a new path and you had no idea you were going to go that way.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, Jesse, I just had an idea when you brought up the idea earlier about the changing the form.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I was a huge strike early on,
Mm-hmm.
and then 3 years ago, I adopted the running on barefoot running.
Yeah.
I was running with the Vibram 5 finger, and then I started with only 5K and then 10K and then half marathon and then marathon with the 5 fingers Vibram. And what I found out was that it significantly changed the form. So
Oh
now
yeah.
now I am midfoot, and then I have not experienced any uh, injury for the past 2 years. Finger crossed. I hope that I can keep keep up with it.
That's it's it's always a tough thing for me. I have another show on the YouTube channel where I talk about running, and I think in a lot of ways the kind of barefoot running movement exposed that there's a lot of inefficiencies with shoes, but at the same time, it it made a lot of people think like that's the only way, or that's you have to run barefoot to run perfectly. And what I try to get across is that it's more about making sure that like you're when you hit the ground, when your foot hits the ground, it's underneath you. Whereas like with the
Yeah.
heel strike, usually it's in front of you. Doesn't have to be, it can be underneath you, but like that's where all that injury comes from. It's like you hit the ground and you're basically breaking every single time you take a step.
Yep.
Well, then no wonder you're going to get injured. Like you're jarring your system and you're breaking and going every single step. Do that over and over thousands of times. Something's going to break.
Not only 1,000. When you run an ultra, it's actually close to 100,000
Yeah. So,
steps.
we're pretty resilient, but we're not unbreakable. I do want to back up a little bit more, and we're going to back up quite a ways. I was trying to learn about the history of graphene, and it seemed like at its inception there was a lack of confidence or maybe skepticism as it being actually useful for anything. Amazing to discover, but then how do we actually use it? And then I couldn't figure out where we got from there to you creating things that are actually useful with it. Can you help me fill in the gaps there from discovery to where you are now?
Sure. I would say that that is a very interesting story. And then now looking back, as you probably know that graphene was discovered by the two scientists in Manchester. And then they received the Nobel Prize in 2010, which is a little bit over a decade ago. I was lucky enough to be involving with graphene since 2008. So I have heard about graphene since then within a very small community of scientists. But to be honest, going back, I have been working with carbon material for my whole life.
Yeah.
During my undergrad back in Vietnam, I was working on a glassy carbon, I would say like similar to graphite material. And then when I first came to the state, my first project was working on carbon nanotube. So it is like a carbon. I now can say that I have always been interested in working with carbon material because they are special chemical substance, I would say, or like carbon is a very special element. Anyway, so graphene at the time was like I would say people see that as a cut open nanotube. So for example, you have a tube like similar to the straw, you cut it open, you lay it flat, that was the graphene. So it's a 2D or two-dimensional material. So as you said earlier, when the graphene was discovered, and then when graphene make a huge splash in the academic and then the world on this is the next generation silicon. This is the next generation wonderful material that can do a lot of different things. What people didn't realize was that how long does it take for a material to be successfully translated from the lab into commercial.
Yeah.
So there are a variety of different ways to look at that, not only from the reliability, but also from the performance perspective, and also from, again, supply chain, which we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So right now in the world, I would say that there are only several um, coal mine in the world, maybe in Canada, maybe in China, actually having a super good quality of the graphene, I mean of the graphite that
Mm-hmm.
can be taken down layer by layer into graphene. That is one way to make graphene. The other way to make graphene is actually by putting one carbon atom together, on together, and then they call that CVD graphene, which is chemical vapor deposition of graphene. The two leading manufacturer of the CVD graphene is IBM and Samsung in Korea. They primarily interested in making that utilizing for the next generation of supercomputer. I am pretty sure that in the next decade or two, we will be seeing carbon-based or like graphene-based supercomputer going into the world. But then right now, as it is right now, graphene has still have a lot of good property, and then that's exactly why we have been working on, or we're actually leveraging the knowledge that other people has been innovate, and then we try to incorporate it into a product that can benefit people.
Yeah, and I could be imagining it too, but I feel like when the researchers won the Nobel Peace, well, not Peace Prize, the Nobel Prize in for graphene, I feel like it may not have been exactly that year, but somewhere around there, I feel like I heard about it. I was in college at the time, my undergraduate, and I feel like I see from time to time, you see a research paper, something published, and somehow a journalist picks it up, talks about it, how it's going to be awesome, and then you hear nothing. And I feel like from the layman's perspective or like the mass market perspective, that people get really skeptical when they hear about any new discovery. They're like, oh, it's never going to go anywhere. I think that's partly to do with just the internet and internet culture sharing so many things, and how things kind of blow up and then fade away, and then you don't actually hear about them. But as you mentioned, like the time, effort, and expertise it takes to go from lab setting to consumer ready product is very intensive. Even if it's like, yes, this has promise, there's still so much more work to be done. I think it's hard as a person that doesn't live in that lane, that doesn't live in the place of taking academic research and making it commercially viable. It's hard to wrap your head around the timeline it takes to actually do that.
Yeah, and also another thing is that there's a risk of everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the regulator need to be there, and then that exactly why I think that that is the right thing to do from the
Yeah.
government perspective, in order to protect the consumer, in order to protect the user, and then actually for us, our insole, same thing. We need
Mm-hmm.
to going through rigorous regulatory approval process, and then it is there for a reason, that we don't want to give out a product that might not help people.
Mm-hmm.
We love our product, but then we want our product to, and the service as well, to be regulated in a way, because there's a lot of things we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we run out of time, I want to ask you about. I think I saw you guys are working on a wearable shirt using graphene. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say that it's still in inception right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that idea came about from the combination of insole and the mask. So
Mm-hmm.
we have successfully integrated the nanomaterial into textile. We have, and then we just have an idea. Hey, if we integrate the graphene into the shirt, can we do other things with it?
Mm-hmm.
And here we are. I really think that if we somehow can turning a shirt into a smart t-shirt,
Mm-hmm.
then we would be able to having a shirt not only keep us warm, but then it's a natural interface between the body and the rest of the network, which is everything we are talking about right now.
So is your intention to have it be like a diagnostic tool, kind of like the insole, or is it again, like you mentioned, people saying to you, is it a solution looking for a problem?
So I would say that in my initial idea right now, we are wearing a Garmin watch that tells us about the heart rate,
Mm-hmm.
especially resting heart rate, for example. So if we, our skin uh, putting out a lot of information, sweat rate, radiation, something about like how dry your skin is, and
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, I think that this episode was sponsored by Sopri, if I
Right.
remember
Yep,
correctly,
that's my
right?
company. Yep.
Yep, chafing product. I have that too, obviously, during my running, and then that happened all the time. Again, what I was trying to say on the product, on the t-shirt product, is that if we were able to somehow um, collecting a lot of physiology data from the from the electrodermal conductive skin conductance, from the heart rate, from the core body temperature, from the sweat rate, we would be able to do a lot on that. And then with the capacity or capability of cloud computing right now, all of those data should be able to dump into the server, and then we can pick out what might be happening, what can potentially happen. We can hopefully prevent stroke, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We can hopefully prevent heat exhaustion, for example, in running application.
Mm-hmm.
So again, yeah, I think that that is literally the vision of Fletcher Power. We were trying to see how we realize the power of the graphene material in a remote diagnosis, in a remote monitoring application that
Mm-hmm.
help human.
I'm hopeful to see kind of how things develop over the next few years with that. So I know you've listened to a few other episodes of the show, so you may know I'd like to ask everybody the same question for a particular season. So before we run out of time, I'll ask you that now. This year, I'm asking everybody, how do you stay motivated after failing to reach a goal?
I have failed a lot. I have to deal with failure all the time. And then that actually the reason why I turned to running as well as biking and triathlon. It doesn't matter which direction you go. You just need to put one foot uh, in front of the other.
Mm-hmm.
Keep on going.
It's a good answer. Ling, if people want to, get the masks, see what you're doing, where can they find you?
Uh, I am very easy to find. Flexurepower.com is the company name. And then I am always open on Twitter and LinkedIn. You can find me on LETUNGLINH.
Sounds good. Thanks for spending some time with me today.
Thank you, Jesse. It's a pleasure.